today's video, we'll be talking about the importance of salt as the establishment of a trading system, as a very valuable commodity that would connect and divide civilizations for most of world history. Much of this video lecture is going to be based on the work of Mark Kurlansky in his 2002 book, Salt, A World History. So let's start by talking about the origins and uses of salt. The Chinese and the Egyptians are among the first civilizations that we know of to use this mineral in their daily lives. There's clear evidence of salt mining in China by 6000 BCE, and some circumstantial evidence or some suggestive evidence of its use even earlier. Archaeologists and historical anthropologists suggest that the importance of salt in human diets grew as the Neolithic Revolution developed and as agriculture spread. Human beings living in hunting and herding societies typically get enough sodium in their diets from the meat that they eat. But as civilizations increasingly moved to rely on plants, they found that they needed to supplement their diets in order to meet their sodium needs. So they started finding salt from other sources. And as populations grew larger and increasingly dependent on stockpiling and trading foodstuffs, they would find that salt became an important tool for preservation to ensure that the meat that they did have, the meat and fish that they had, could be preserved long enough to save it or trade it. For most of human history, when refrigeration was non-existent, salt was the most common and most reliable preservation method. So people in ancient history would use salt to meet dietary needs, to flavor their foods, and to preserve their foods. The Egyptians, for example, used evaporated salt from the sea and from the Nile River in their dishes, and as an essential part of the mummification process. The Chinese also mined salt from the sea and used it to flavor food, used it as a preserving agent for fish. They also developed soy sauce as an additional sauce for food, and it ended up playing a role in the development of gunpowder. The Roman Empire took salt and the preservation of food to a whole new level. They had a heavily fish-based diet rooted in the Mediterranean. And so fish is typically very suitable to salt preservation. And so they would rely heavily on salt to flavor their food and to preserve the fish that was at the core of their daily diets. Romans built roads, such as the Via Salaria, to make the transfer of salt easier. Early Germanic tribes, such as the Gauls and the Celts, would use salt mines extensively, creating vast quantities before being conquered by the Romans. Christian Europe in the Middle Ages also contributed heavily to the reliance on salt. The Catholic Church, as the dominant institution in the region during the Middle Ages, restricted meat in everyday diets, creating a huge market for fish. Also during the Middle Ages, cod was discovered. Cod was the perfect salted fish. It had a very low fat content, so when it was properly salted, it lasted much longer than other fish. There was a huge market in medieval Europe for fish, and particularly for cod, leading some to suggest that there's evidence that Basque fishermen, and the Basque region is a region in between Spain and France, there's some suggestion that Basque fishermen were fishing cod in the Americas prior to the arrival of Christopher Columbus. So salt became an essential commodity. And because it couldn't be synthesized yet, because it couldn't be made, it was a natural resource in heavy demand. And so when you take those two things, when you take a relatively limited natural resource and combine it with very heavy demand, you have an incredibly valuable commodity that could be traded. They could be traded in these global trading networks like the Silk Road, could be traded across the Red Sea, could be traded across the Mediterranean. And as civilization spread, salt became one of the most important trading commodities, so that the economic impact of salt on world history really can't be overstated. It was valuable for the preservation and flavoring of food. It was used in religious ceremonies and rituals. It was used in pharmacology. And because it was a natural substance that had value in people's lives, it became important, economically speaking, across time and space in human history, operating as a valuable bartering tool, as a way to pay people for their work, and as a source of government revenue. The earliest salt tax that we have evidence for was in 2200 BCE in China. So salt existed at the center of economic trade and power. It was one of those commodities that transcends individual civilizations and connected disparate parts of the globe. As civilizations grew and tried to maintain their connections to salt, their ability to get salt, elaborate trading networks crisscrossed Eurasia and Africa, the northern part of Africa, connecting mining locations and seabeds with these growing and thriving civilizations in Europe, Asia, and Africa. Because salt was also at the center of power norms and power struggles, artificial trade restrictions created an even bigger demand. So salt was at the center of global trade, and it was also at the center of global conflict, because wars had been fought over salt. Venice fought and won a war with Genoa over salt, establishing dominance over the Mediterranean trade. At least until Christopher Columbus opened the New World, opened the Americas to trade with Europe. The Columbian Exchange opened new salt markets and sources, and would end up destroying the Mediterranean salt trade, damaging the Venetian economy. In the American colonies, fast forward to the 18th century, in the American colonies, a salt shortage and high taxes on salt by the British created discontent in the Americas. This discontent and discontent with taxes on salt was one of the contributing factors of the American Revolution. In fact, during the American Revolution, the British would try to restrict American access to salt as a form of punishment and control, trying to weaken the population and turn them against the revolution. In France, a few years later, a tax on salt known as the gabelle created major unrest in pre-revolutionary France, which was one of the factors resulting in the French Revolution. And in the early 20th century, in British India, Mahatma Gandhi would lead his supporters on a march in protest against British salt taxes, suggesting that high taxes on salt was one of many causes of the independence movement in India. So even though it's hard to imagine salt, a substance that we can buy for pennies in the grocery store, was a transformative commodity in human history, it was. From the earliest civilizations organized by the Neolithic Revolution to the Indian independence movement in the 20th century, salt has been a constant. It's been a unifying and dividing component of global trade, of global unrest, and of the civilizations and moments that made up world history. Thank you.